I am fearful that what we are seeing now on college campuses is going to be so much worse because these kids are being marinated in Jew hatred starting in kindergarten.
Hello, I'm Jonathan Tobin, Editor-in-Chief of the Jewish News Syndicate, JNS.org, and you're listening to Top Story, a weekly podcast where I analyze the most important stories happening in Jewish news around the world. Each week, I will break down politics, foreign policy, and culture to provide insights into what is going on behind the headlines. Hello, and welcome to Top Story. Thanks for joining us. We're continuing our JNS coverage of the war on Israel that was launched by Hamas on October 7th and the subsequent surge in anti-Semitism in the United States by speaking with Lori Lowenthal Marcus of the public interest law firm the Deborah Project. But first, I want to remind you to like this video and podcast, subscribe to JNS, and click on the bell for notifications. I also want to remind you that you don't have to wait a full week for more Top Story analysis. There is a daily Top Story podcast where I share more news and analysis with you about the most significant issues of the day. You can find The Daily Show under Top Story with Jonathan Tobin on the JNS channel on Apple, Spotify, Google Play, or wherever you get your podcasts. Also, you can see us on Telegram. You can find the latest news, including Top Story and other JNS TV content there by subscribing. And now to today's program. The post-October 7th epidemic of anti-Semitism is getting harder and harder to ignore. The last 3 months have seen pro-Hamas mobs marching in the streets, chanting calls for Israel's destruction and in favor of terrorism against Jews in the Jewish state and abroad. They've harassed Jewish-owned businesses in a manner reminiscent of Germany in the 1930s in various cities. They've blocked highways, bridges, tunnels, and airports, largely with impunity. And they've turned college campuses into hostile environments for Jewish students. And rather than being treated as the work of extremists and hate groups, those responsible for this behavior are lauded as idealists and progressives in the corporate liberal media. There's no secret as to what is fueling this targeting of Jews. In the last generation, the spread of woke ideology in the form of critical race theory, the diversity, equity, and inclusion catechism, and intersectionality, which falsely preaches that the war to destroy the one Jewish state on the planet is analogous to the struggle for civil rights in the United States. This has taken over academia as well as the media, the business world, and thanks to President Joe Biden, the federal government. This surge in Jew hatred is the product of the myth that Israel and the Jews are white oppressors. The congressional hearing that exposed the unwillingness of 3 of America's most prestigious academic institutions to condemn advocacy for the genocide of Jews as violations of their codes of conduct highlighted the problem in higher education. But one of the most underreported aspects of this plague of anti-Semitism is the way the same toxic ideas have, contrary to the claims of many on the left, filtered down into elementary and secondary schools and become ubiquitous there too. Whether in the form of teacher education and training that indoctrinates those instructing children in this new secular divisive religion of hate, or in curricula, especially those in the field of ethnic studies, the result is a situation where public school classrooms have become incubators for anti-Semitism. While a few Jewish organizations and legal groups are trying to combat this trend, they find themselves swimming against a tidal wave of woke ideology that has gone from being condemned and considered extremist in the recent years to mainstream, and now the new orthodoxy in the educational world. And much of the organized Jewish world is not only failing to combat it or alert their constituents to the danger, but are complicit. Seen from that perspective, the most serious question to be asked now is not about the future careers of those 3 college presidents who were grilled in Congress, nor is it solely about the hold that the woke DEI catechism still have on those schools and almost every other college and university, despite the furor over that hearing. Rather, it is the fact that the same toxic beliefs that are already being entrenched in grade schools, middle schools, and high schools around the country, meaning that more and more young people are arriving at college already well versed in the idea that race is all that matters and that discrimination and even violence against Jews and Israel is permissible because they are on the wrong side of history and the diversity scale, and undeserving of inclusion or even safety. In this anti-Zionist and anti-Semitic manner, this is being mainstreamed in public discourse in a way that is almost unprecedented. While DEI and the rest of the woke belief system is terrible for America, the way it enables anti-Semitism illustrates that once again the Jews are always the canaries in the coal mine. And until we start doing something about the situation in grades K-12, what happens in college won't matter nearly as much. To speak about the spread of anti-Semitism in America's schools, we're fortunate to have back with us today Lori Lowenthal Marcus, legal director of the Deborah Project, a public interest law firm that represents those who have been discriminated against in educational settings because they are Jewish and or pro-Israel. Former journalist, as well as a graduate of Harvard Law, she has served a number of Jewish groups and causes, perhaps most notably the international Zionist organization Z Street, on behalf of which she successfully sued the IRS after it refused to consider Z Street's application for tax-exempt status in violation of the U.S. Constitution. Lori Lowenthal Marcus, welcome back to Top Story.
Thank you, Jonathan. Nice to be with you.
Lori, thanks so much for taking the time to join us today. I want to start by grounding our discussion about the spread of anti-Semitism in American education by referencing the congressional hearing last month in which 3 elite university presidents wouldn't declare that advocacy for genocide of Jews was against their school's rules. But as important as that was, because it did draw an unprecedented amount of attention to the shocking situation on college campuses, where anti-Semitism seems to be running amok, isn't there a lot more to the issue than just what's happening in higher education?
Oh, absolutely. And in some ways, it's more frightening in other places. Those other places being K-12 public schools. It is unbelievable what is happening there. And as awful as it is to hear an elite college president waffle over whether or not someone actually has to commit genocide before they would be violating bullying regulations. In K-12 schools, there are now going on walkouts for Gaza. There are calls for ending the genocide. There are posters in public school hallways, huge white letters on a black background, obviously professionally done, not done by the kids. And the genocide, this is teacher-driven, this is unions-driven, this is violently and virulently anti-Semitic organizations-driven, and they're using the kids and the teachers' unions as vehicles for bringing this horrendous stuff into the classrooms. It's being taught completely. So that's sort of what things look like and what you see and hear. But in the classrooms, the kind of material that it's being taught as fact is really terrifying. These are children. It's from kindergarten until 12th grade. They are captive in the classroom. They have to be in the classrooms by law. Their parents have to send them to school by law. And teachers are providing information like, at kind of an extreme, like as fact, Palestine is a country in the Middle East bordered by Jordan, Lebanon, and Egypt. That is, there is no Israel. Being taught that Jerusalem is the capital of Palestine. Kids are seeing this, an image that has been around for quite some time. We've seen it in adult situations, this disappearing Palestine map, where it has a map after World War I and before the recreation of Israel. It's labeled Palestine. As we know, it's a region. Children don't know that. It looks like a country, like the other countries around it. And it has like 4 or 5 frames. And Palestine is disappearing, and Israel is appearing and taking over the landmass. And what they are showing this to children to understand is that the Jews came to a country called Palestine and have committed ethnic cleansing, have taken over their homes. It's horrendous. And, we thought it was dangerous and bad when they were showing these kinds of maps to adults and on college campuses. But for kids, this is unbelievable. So I'll take a breath, and you can ask questions, or I can just keep going because I have so much material. I speak to parents of public school children almost around the clock. They are terrified. They are waking up to the problem of anti-Semitism. They hadn't really recognized it in the same way that, Jonathan, you and I have recognized it for years. This is new. A lot of it is happening in California, which is where this ethnic studies component of public school curricula was really developed. Critical ethnic studies, not some other kind of ethnic studies, but critical ethnic studies, which includes a component of, teachpalestine.org. So California is really, the ground zero of horrible stuff that's happening in schools, but it's even beyond what I understood last time when I was on with you, Jonathan. It's not just ethnic studies courses. It is almost every kind of course. So it's global history, obviously, social studies, kind of obviously, but in literature classes, in math classes. So it's pervasive, and it is spreading across the country. We've seen it now in New Jersey. It's rampant in Minnesota. It's in Massachusetts. It's in some places in Texas. It started in California, and it's already metastasized eastward.
Let's back up for a moment and tell us a bit about what the Deborah Project does and what differentiates it from other Jewish legal public interest organizations.
Okay, the Deborah Project is a public interest law firm that asserts and defends the civil rights of Jews facing discrimination in educational settings. So what sets us apart from other public interest legal organizations is we really see ourselves as a law firm. We're we are not an advocacy organization. We don't do some things that other organizations do. We are focused on using the courtrooms as a vehicle for change. We liken ourselves or want to emulate the NAACP Legal Defense Fund. We really are asserting the legal rights of Jews in education. And the other thing is we're only focused on education, and it's K-12, and it's undergraduate, graduate, and faculty. So it's the full spectrum of education, but it's only education that we're dealing with.
Right. Now, we've heard a lot in recent years from liberals as the debates about critical race theory in a broader secular context have escalated about how it is merely an abstract idea, but it's only taught in graduate school. Explain to us why this explanation is wrong and how CRT, critical race theory, and, diversity, equity, and inclusion, the DEI, as I like to say, woke catechism, have filtered into primary and secondary education, and what this means for the spread of anti-Semitism.
Well, it's fascinating because some of these organizations that are promoting this kind of critical ethnic studies, they say on their own websites, this is critical race theory. We are putting it into the education space. So they acknowledge it with no shame. So all the people who are saying it isn't critical race theory, someone's wrong, but if the material looks the same and walks the same and smells the same, it is the same. And so it is about the power structure you have. Kids are being taught there are oppressors and there are the oppressed. And the oppressors across the board are bad. They have stolen whatever they have. They've taken it from the true owners, the, quote, indigenous people. And so that's, I mean, it's Marxist, Leninist, hogwash that we recognized right away. It was denied, but now some of them at least are, some of the proponents are coming clean and admitting, yes, that's what this is. And frighteningly enough, in lots of schools and in California in general, that part, the oppressor oppressed, the imbalance in power, the needing to recognize the intersectionality and the focus on identity, that is okay with them. That's okay. The anti-Semitic part at least got a lot of pushback when a law requiring all graduating students in California to have taken an ethnic studies course. But it's the Jews and Armenians and Sikhs actually pushed back. And so some of the most awful material was removed, but this other stuff is still there. White supremacy is right there. And it's being taught as fact, and they are encouraging people to be social justice warriors. And if I was approached by some parents who were very concerned because shortly after October 7th, there was going to be a walkout from a high school in California, walkout for Gaza. And the walkout is during the school day. That's what they mean. They're walking out of school for Gaza. I'm not sure what they thought they were going to accomplish by doing that, but that is what the goal was. And I said, well, that can't be allowed. I mean, it has to be wrong. And I looked through the ed code. And in fact, in California, at least in the particular district I was looking at there, kids are allowed to walk out of school to attend political events. That's permitted. Are you kidding me? I mean, but they see that as an educational benefit. Now, there are, at the same time, regulations and laws that require students to be permitted to have full access to their education and not be disrupted and not be bullied. And so these are in tension. But actually, a lot of the law, just as I know you have free speech and hate speech, and neither one is absolute. But it's being battled out in the schools, and by and large, parents are loath to go to court against the schools that their kids attend for all kinds of reasons, most of which are good reasons. It's hard to argue. But while the law for K-12 is very strong, it's much stronger actually than for college or graduate school, because public school teachers, K-12, don't have free speech rights in the classroom. So that's a really strong weapon. But if you don't use it, it's useless. And that's what, we're still struggling with, trying to help families, parents, students, teachers. Also, Jewish teachers are being intimidated and bullied and told bad things about themselves, and kids believe bad things about their Jewish teachers if the teachers say, yes, I do believe in the right of Israel to exist. That was enough to excuse a student in a math class from having to show up to that math class anymore because she didn't feel safe. I mean, there's so much that is bizarre, and to say it's counterfactual is, just ridiculous. It's truly dangerous, harmful, And it's putting political ideology first and weaponizing it. And I'm reminded when I say the word weaponizing that in one high school class, a teacher, the lead social studies teacher for 10th grade in this school, brought in materials to teach about this conflict, the Gaza-Israel conflict. And what he brought in was something from NPR's Amy Goodman, Democracy Now! She had a segment on the weaponization of anti-Semitism. And you had Peter Beinart talking about how it was outrageous to grill the presidents of those universities, Harvard, Penn, and MIT, because really Intifada, that's not a violent word. The first Intifada was mostly nonviolent. I don't know what he means by that, because those words mean something different than what he thinks they mean. But that's, teachers have a lot of leeway. And this is what is being used to teach kids. So that there will be more generations with more Jew hatred, is what I'm saying.
Okay, Lori, that's very true. But can you give us even some more examples of how anti-Israel stuff and basically anti-Semitic education that you've discovered in the course of people reaching out to you for help, how that's being used in the public schools, and how did that get there beyond that? I know sometimes it's the teachers, but where is it coming from in general? What are their sources?
The sources are organizations that are committed to eliminating the state of Israel, such as Jewish Voice for Peace. There's also something called the Palestinian Youth Movement, which supplies materials. They were also one of the organizations that was just revealed that was behind the blockage of the bridges into New York City. There's something called AROC, Arab Resource Organizing Committee. They produce a lot of material. They actually had contracts with the San Francisco School District. They had people in the schools allegedly working as community resources, but they were believed to be behind one of the first walkouts for Gaza in California. There's something called the Middle East Children's Alliance, MECA, which is created the teachpalestine.org material. The Teach Palestine toolkit is how it's packaged. And they have a lot of material. They have, of course, a Jewish former educator who's the head of it. There's a woman called Samia Shoman, who is an educator. She created all of, or most of, the material that was in the original model curriculum that had to be removed from the curriculum for ethnic studies in California, all the stuff about Palestine, Israel. She was a teacher in the San Mateo County school district, and people complained about her. So what happened? She was kicked upstairs, and she became an administrator, so she has even more power and is spreading her material. She's an intelligent woman with a mission, and she's being quite successful. And there have been numbers of school board meetings recently about the material that's being presented coming from her, and the school board is very protective of her. She is not someone who takes criticism well. She's eager to rush immediately and talk about how she's being discriminated against. In fact, at a recent school board meeting, someone apologized to her because her children, she has twins, and she puts it in all of her bio material. She has twins named Palestine and Jihad. Those are the names of her twins. And people mentioned that at the school board meeting, and then the school board at the next meeting apologized to her for bringing up her children's names, which are in every public document that she posts about herself. So there is a lot of fear. As I said before, the unions are a vehicle for getting it into the schools. The teachers' unions are really strong. They're strong everywhere. We know that. Unions in general are very strong. Teachers' unions are incredibly strong. And with the great shortage of teachers, the school districts are afraid to discipline the teachers for doing this. So it's a really awful situation, and it's hard to figure out how to stop it. And the unions are very, very difficult to fight against. So I keep telling parents, you have to go after the school districts and hold them accountable. Ultimately, they're responsible for what's in the schools. Union members can say whatever they want, anywhere they want, except in the classroom. The classroom is the responsibility of the principals and ultimately the school board. So, that's another reason why people are reluctant to bring lawsuits against their own school districts. It's taking resources away. And yes, that's true. But what's the alternative? I mean, there's no other way that we have found to stop it. Stop this material from coming in, even though it violates so many laws, board policies, the guardrails put in by the governor of California. I mean, it's wrong. It should be prohibited, and yet it's still there and no one's being punished.
I guess the question that I have is, these are terrible stories, but how prevalent? I mean, how widespread is it? I mean, obviously you're involved in a lot of cases and a lot of people have reached out to you. You're learning more about these things. I mean, you've said about how it's like not just California, which is sort of the incubator for so much that is toxic in our culture, but it's spread all over. How prevalent are these teach-ins and walkouts for Gaza, especially since October 7th? How much of a presence in elementary and secondary education has this become since October 7th?
Well, we certainly know that it has happened in New York. We saw that happen in a school in Hillcrest, which is in Queens in New York. And that walkout was because a teacher took a picture of herself with I stand with Israel, or I support Israel, on her Facebook. And as a result, the students rioted and rampaged, and she had to lock herself in an office and be escorted out the back door. So it has gone other places. I haven't seen that many other walkouts, but I am seeing a tremendous amount of infiltration of this bad, very bad and dangerous information. In fact, I heard about a situation in, I forget which southern state, but there was a model UN, and there was horribly anti-Semitic, anti-Israel, stated as fact information as part of the model UN of students, high school students. So I know that it's spreading. I know that there are lots of teachers across New York City. Actually, I have a client in New York who told us that the Jewish parents were thrown out of a school board meeting. Jewish parents told to leave. So those are the coasts. Does it mean it's not in what's called, real America or flyover country, whichever view you have? I know, as I said earlier, Minnesota is really bad, and I guess that's not surprising, given who represents them and what that means. You should represent them because there's a lot of anti-Israel, pro-Muslim population, I'm shocked by
You're referencing Ilhan Omar there.
Yes, I am. So, and I do see it. I see it in New Jersey. It may just be that the rest of America hasn't learned about the Deborah Project yet. And most of the attention on the anti-Semitism in schools, of course, has been at the college level. And there's a real push to go after the elite universities because you get a lot of press for that. But it's so many other places and shocking places. Notre Dame University had a horrible, horrible teach-in the week of October 7th, blaming Israel for the massacres and describing what happened insistently, that it wasn't terrorism, it was resistance. And this was a teach-in by faculty members at University of Notre Dame. I mean,
which is supposedly a conservative university, and certainly it's a Catholic university.
A Catholic university. Yeah, it was shocking. So I want to point out a few other things. I've mentioned at least once, if not more than that public school teachers don't have free speech rights in the classroom, but nobody knows that. The parents don't know it, the teachers don't know it, the principals don't know it, and I think even sometimes their legal departments don't know it, because I keep hearing from parents that principals say, oh, well, they're allowed to have from the river to the sea flags in their classrooms because that's covered by free speech. No, it isn't. It isn't. And I until more people start insisting that it is not permitted, and do more than write an angry letter, which is the stage most parents are at now. They're writing angry letters, which is such a Jewish thing to do. Of course, our joke is, yes, Jews write very angry letters to the editors, and other people who are trying to assert their rights for their people are rioting in the streets and demanding that change be made. Letters to the editor almost never actually result in change, maybe corrections to articles, but not changes in educational or other policies.
Right. Let's back up for a minute and talk a bit more about teachers' unions. I'd like you to explain the role that teachers' unions have had in spreading these toxic ideas, and also why this is happening, because it's, these are essentially political organizations, and how these very political, sort of toxic leftist ideas have become basically, almost union policy in certain areas.
Well, I only really started paying attention to teachers' unions in a focused way when I began to pay attention to the ethnic studies materials. And at that point, I looked very carefully at the teachers' union in Los Angeles School District, UTLA. And the head of that union has, as part of her bio, that she's a Black Lives Matter activist. So I think that probably gave the unions a lot of renewed energy and focus. I actually was just looking, I was trying to figure out, there are two major national teachers unions, the NEA, National Education Association, and the AFT, the American Federation of Teachers. And I was going through their websites to see, well, what is it that they're pushing for? And what they're pushing for, it's all about leftist social issues. And the reason I first began to be interested in, when I say I mean the Deborah Project, and I as part of it, began to focus on ethnic studies, was because the Los Angeles Teachers Union was threatening to pass a BDS resolution. Now, 5 years ago, 10 years ago, boycott, divestment, and sanctions resolutions were the big, heavy weapon that was being used to cudgel Israel and Israel supporters, Zionists. But that's kind of receded a little bit, although the Modern Language Association just passed a kind of squishy BDS resolution, and the American Anthropological Association did as well. But it's morphed now into very much direct teaching about the Palestinian narrative. And what is done is they align what they understand to be the Palestinian narrative with the Native American and BIPOC narrative in the United States, with Israel aligned as the evil oppressor with America. So, it's all wrapped up in the very much anti-Western civilization, anti-capitalism, anti-nuclear family, anti-two sexes, and
and also analogizing the struggle for the Palestinian war to destroy the one Jewish state on the planet with the struggle for civil rights in the United States.
Yes, because the brown people are put down by the white people is the gross cartoon version of it. And of course, we know that the Israeli population is more than a majority people of color, but you can't get that through to people. You can't, Jonathan, the ignorance of everyone, including most Jews, about Middle East history and the current conflict is astounding. There are so many Jewishly identified because they're concerned about this issue, and they don't understand that Palestine was never a country. And I just had a quiet disagreement with some people who are advocates on our side in this Zoom, and one of the people said, well, it is a state now. I said, no, it isn't. Yes, the UN has recognized it as a state. I said, no, it hasn't. Look it up. It's a non-member, entity, as are lots of NGOs and so forth. But people don't know, and ignorance really is very dangerous in this area, like in so many different areas.
Yeah, let's focus for a minute back on ethnic studies courses, which have, as you said, has been a particular problem in California. Why is it, that they have this role that they play in spreading anti-Semitism and anti-Zionism? How does that work? And how has some of the Jewish advocacy on this issue actually been counterproductive? Because instead of understanding that the whole concept is a threat, Jews have just wanted their share of the pie, which doesn't really actually advance their interests.
It's an argument that continues through, an hour ago and beyond. The second point being there are so many advocacy organizations, legacy organizations, and others who feel like either because they actually think Jews should be part of ethnic studies, when Jews should be a part of history, world history. The Holocaust should certainly be taught, and Jews as, inventors, whatever you're studying. But as a separate group, no, we only lose. They're never going to have positive things to teach about Jews. The DEI stuff, we are excluded from that. We Jews are excluded from just about every DEI entity I've ever heard of, except for one. So I'm not being hyperbolic. I actually have looked at many of them. But why would we want to build on something that we know is fundamentally flawed? Why would we put our own ornaments on that tree, as it were? It's I think because ultimately the fear is too great to fight it. We can't be against DEI. We can't be against ethnic studies because that's what right-wing people do. And that's still a huge problem, even with people who are waking up to anti-Semitism. They still think that some presidents whom we know were not good friends to Israel, they believe were good friends to Israel, and a president who was good on lots of issues concerning Israel is the devil incarnate, period. And there's nothing that can dislodge that notion from their heads. So they don't want to be seen as being anti-DEI or anti-ethnic studies. There was a professor at Harvard Law School who picked a bone with someone who is close to the Deborah Project and was livid that the Deborah Project was going after ethnic studies, and it was making him feel unsafe. This is a professor at Harvard Law School. It's just, and we didn't back down because that's not who we are, but most people would. It's really hard to argue against the established authorities of the left. It is. I see it.
Tell me a little bit about how the debate, to the extent that there is a coherent debate about the definition of anti-Semitism, plays in this. We know the IHRA, the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance, definition of anti-Semitism includes things about that, claiming that that Jews in Israel are the Nazis and demonizing Israel, that and anti-Zionism itself, that those are anti-Semitic. Yet, a lot of people, even within the Jewish community on the left, are opposing this so that they can basically continue to bash Israel, not really bash Israel, but to oppose Israel's existence. How has this played a role in the debate in the schools and your the ability of advocates for Jewish families to fight back against this propaganda?
Well, there has been a really, really strong pushback against the legitimization of the IRA definition by anti-Israel advocates. And there's a lot of misinformation that's been disseminated as a result. The number one being, that's contrary to free speech, or the way it's described by people on the other side is that any criticism of Israel is going to be criminalized. It's just ridiculous. And most of the IRA definition has nothing to do with Israel, but there is a recognition that some forms of anti-Zionism are examples of anti-Semitism. I have to say, this Department of Education and this administration has been pretty good at recognizing that acts of anti-Zionism can be grounds for discrimination. And so that's been helpful. But, of course, we saw at the National Strategy for Combating Anti-Semitism in May, the Biden administration refused to adopt the IRA definition. It did embrace it, which is a nice wordsmithing, but it means it didn't adopt it. It isn't the one they use, and it recognized other definitions which are very not helpful, the Jerusalem document and the Nexus document. We have a strong push by lots of Jews and advocates for the Jewish people who are pushing hard for adoption of the IRA definition. It's been adopted by well over 30, I think it might be over 40 now, countries around the world, and dozens of other governmental associations, lots and lots of states, some towns, some school districts, but some of the pushback, bizarrely to me enough, is that in some places, some national Jewish organizations don't embrace the IRA definition. They've chosen a definition instead that excludes anti-Zionism as part of anti-Semitism. And yet, they're pushing to advocate and saying they represent people in their region when the Jewish individuals in that region disagree. So it's gotten pretty ugly. It's part of the war of the legacy organizations against those who are upstarts who are attacking the Jewish legacy organizations. Charles Jacobs' group, Jewish Leadership Project, is pushing hard against. It's such a shame that we have so much still sinat chinam, and I see it myself. There are organizations who are very annoyed that someone from outside California is providing legal advice. Now, the advice that I'm giving parents in webinars is the fact that public school teachers don't have free speech rights in the classroom. Anybody can look it up. It's not like I'm advising them what to do in their personal situations. I'm giving general information. And yet the sniping is just unbelievable. So instead of everyone working together against the enemy, we're, scuffling in the mud, which I guess is the Jewish way, sadly. So I think and I hope that October 7th affected everybody, all Jews in a way. I know so many have woken up. And so maybe it's an opportunity for there to be more harmony. We'll see. But I'm not that hopeful about it.
What's the impact of all this on Jewish kids and on Jewish parents? How is that affected? Jews have lived in this country and acted, and certainly in recent generations as if, there are no threats to Jewish life except those sort of, on the very extremes. How has this impacted Jewish life, in your opinion?
Well, what I've seen is a real awakening, a slow opening of the eyes to the reality still of Jew hatred. And so Jews are joining together. I see it now. Jews getting together, writing letters together, showing up at city council hearings and school board meetings and pushing back. So that's the good part. The bad part is I have also heard Jewish parents say that their children tell them they're sad that they are white. They wish they weren't white. Another parent shared that their kids are questioning, why do they speak English at home instead of Spanish? Spanish was the first language of this continent, and everybody should be speaking Spanish instead. And of course, that's what they're hearing.
That would have been news to the indigenous peoples, as they call it.
Right.
But
well,
nevertheless, yeah.
Southern California we're talking about.
Yeah, it's actually not the indigenous language of Southern California, but never mind. Yeah.
That's what they've been told, and that's what they embrace. They do. Everybody has their, I forget what it's called, land acclamation, in everybody's signature block. I don't notice anybody handing over property, but they do have that acknowledgement that the land was someone else's, but and they certainly are being taught to hate the evil empire, which is the United States. But to get back to your point, Jonathan, I am fearful that what we are seeing now on college campuses is going to be so much worse because these kids are being marinated in Jew hatred starting in kindergarten. And they're learning as fact that Jews, the Jewish state, is an occupying force. I started telling people the only time I know of Israel committing ethnic cleansing is when they took all the Jews living and dead out of Gaza. That's the only ethnic cleansing I know about. But that's not what they're talking about. They're describing Jews as evil people. And there are Jewish Voice for Peace is growing. And
group which I might add, traffics routinely in anti-Semitism and blood libels against Jews in Israel.
Yeah, they're a little bit secretive. I would love to know who's actually members, like how many of them are actually Jewish, and whether those who are born Jewish, the Jews by chance, I wonder how many of them have ever done anything that resembles practicing Judaism in their lives. They're just, as a Jews who like to criticize Jews. But it's, I have begun to hear again about people thinking about leaving. There's a fully tenured faculty member that I represent who's talking about leaving the country. And it's because she sees worse things coming. So I think we're at a place where it could still be turned back, but soon we'll be past that point. And people really may be looking back at the American Jews of the 20s, 30s, and 40s, how ironic. Why did they stay there?
Well, let's hope it doesn't come to that. But let me go back to a point you referenced earlier. Have Jewish groups, especially those that are supposed to be defending Jews against anti-Semitism, been doing much to combat the spread of woke anti-Semitism in the schools? And if they haven't, why not? And I know, as you said, since October 7th, there's been some awakening, but it's clear, some of, let's name names, and the Anti-Defamation League, its curricula has included a lot of woke stuff in it. Maybe they're changing, maybe they've woken up, but what role are Jewish defense organizations playing in this battle inside these schools where Jewish kids are being bullied and subjected to this sort of not merely anti, criticism of Israel, but, really dehumanization of Jews and Israelis?
Well, I do think that the organizations are seeing an opportunity. They need to step up now. The Jewish people are demanding protection. I have seen numbers of the legacy organizations offering trainings on anti-Semitism for schools, encouraging people to follow them as they advocate for the Jewish people with the legislatures and legislators on their behalf. I don't know what they're saying, and I am distrustful, but I'm an outlier. I'm distrustful of I just talked about the as a Jews and the in-the-room Jews who like having access and are so frightened about losing access to important people that they go to meetings but don't really push hard for anything that they claim to the members they're working to achieve. So I am reluctant to trust what's happening. And maybe I'm being unfair, but I have seen it too many times where the people are sold out by those who are supposed to be leading and protecting them. I don't want to hear, I'll be in the room, don't worry about it. I have relationships. I have access. I'll take care of it. I want accountability from you too, not just from the political classes, but from our own defense organizations and leaders. It's problematic. And, I have encouraged parents to ask, and others, teachers, to ask, well, how long have you known about this problem and what have you done thus far? Because you've been around for a long time and things are getting worse. So what's the new strategy so that I can trust that there could be something different going back to the same organizations? There is a renewed emphasis. Look, I just saw, and I had to laugh, just saw this long article about the California Jewish Legislative Caucus that they're really upset, and they've come together and they don't understand why their allies aren't with them, and they're trying to eradicate anti-Semitism from the schools. The Deborah Project went to the leadership before we filed our first litigation against ethnic studies, and we were practically, if we had met in person, we would have been thrown out of the room, and instead we were reprimanded not to bring the litigation because the unions are our friends and they took care of the problem of ethnic studies. It's not going to be a problem, and we should just stop it and get out. Who are we from the East Coast to be saying anything about this? So I find it a little hard that they're now pretending to be the great protectors and saviors of Jews in California when look what they allowed to happen. They said the unions are our friends. No, they're not. Lots of members of my family a generation ago, they were teachers, they were members of the unions. It was a different time. Now, the teachers' unions are not our friends, and the Jewish teachers in the unions are frightened and developing their own subgroups, and it's a serious problem. And to be told not to do something to protect children, we should wait because no child had been hurt yet. Really? I'm not going to wait for Jewish children to be beaten up in class before I try and stop what's going to lead to that. It's just craziness. So, as you can tell, I don't have a lot of respect for leadership in lots of situations. I really don't. But I am hoping that there will be change, just as their constituents are waking up. Maybe they'll demand accountability, and we'll see something positive, at least briefly, and then it'll be on to the next important issue. But this is an opportunity for there to be change.
Right. Well, before we end the program, Lori, can you tell us how our viewers and listeners can learn more about the Deborah Project and how they can help it?
Okay. www.deborahproject, DEBORAH, project.org. You can go to the website, see what we're working on. You can reach us through the website. It'll go directly to me. Let us know what's happening in your community, and we'll see if we can help. We're happy to give lots of education. It doesn't have to only be litigation. I spend most of every day dealing with parents who are concerned about what's happening in their schools. And most of them are never going to bring a lawsuit. That may not make the donors to the Deborah Project happy. They'd like to see some newspaper articles or media about lawsuits we're filing, but it is doing a real service for the Jewish people. I believe it, and I believe in it. So you can help us by giving us more information and allowing us to help.
Right. Well, Lori, thanks so much for joining us today, and please keep us updated on everything that the Deborah Project is doing to combat the plague of anti-Semitism. We also want to thank our audience. Please remember to tune in every day for Top Story Daily Edition. And whether you're listening to us on Apple, Google Play, Spotify, or any of the other podcast platforms, or watching us live on Facebook or Twitter, or on the JNS YouTube channel, please like and or subscribe to Top Story. Click on the bell for notifications and give us good reviews. Please write to us at editor@jns.org. Let us know where you listen or watch the show and what you think about it. And remember, keep reading and thinking for yourself. And we'll see you again next week.